Animation from the 1970s is known to be smudgy, over the top, and just overall low quality compared to other decades. But if you give me like 30 minutes, I'll show you there are some serious masterpieces from this decade that you do not want to miss out on.
Can you
So there's definitely some very important points of context to get into before we dive into all the films, shows, and animated shorts that were so huge and so good at the time. So the 70s was almost the transition from the golden age of American animation to the dark age. This was kind of the prime, this is when it was starting, and here's why that was going on. So by the beginning of the 1970s, the golden age of American animation was really over. This age gave us Mickey Mouse, Bugs Bunny, Tom and Jerry, and overall it was just amazing. But by the time the 1970s rolled around, we were really beginning to enter the dark age. And there were a lot of reasons for this. Number one, especially in America, there were just a lot of economic struggles at the time. The economic boom from World War II was really over, and there were other, political things that we're not really gonna talk about. Just all you need to know is that there was less money floating around. So there were a lot of budget cuts in some of our favorite studios, including even Disney. And these budget cuts led to things like smaller staffs and much cheaper animation processes that you're gonna see and we're gonna talk about a lot more later. On top of this, with animation becoming so much more popular on Sunday television, there was a lot more censorship going on since it was really starting to be marketed completely towards children and specifically for children, so they didn't want these intense, dangerous, and dark cartoons coming out. And on top of all this, during the 1970s, a lot of really good live action films came out. We had things like Taxi Driver and The Godfather that were really diverting attention away from animation. And most importantly, it should be no surprise that this transition from the golden age to the dark age directly coincides with the passing of one of the greatest minds our country has ever seen, and that's Walt Disney. So overall, what's really important to know here is that the 70s saw huge changes in animation philosophies and processes because of the financial situation everyone was in and an overall growing change in the market's taste. On Christmas Eve of 1970, Disney released the Aristocats, and this was their first film that was completed after the passing of Walt Disney. Although these were dark times for the Disney family, Ollie Johnson and Frank Thomas, who were two of Disney's legendary 9 old men, created some beautiful 2D hand-drawn animation. To me, the Aristocats animation is highlighted by their fluid character movements that brings these little cats to life, and their beautiful hand-drawn scenes of Paris.
Walt Disney Pictures presents a classic case of catnapping.
So the plot follows Duchess and her kittens, who are kidnapped by their greedy but totally valid butler Edgar, who is trying to get rid of them so he can claim an inheritance instead of them.
Oh, no, George, to my cats.
To your cats?
They get placed in the heart of Paris and go on an adventure to get back home with the help of a smart street alley cat named O'Malley. One big intrigue for me in this movie was the music. Disney really switched up from their usual orchestra vibes to a vibrant jazz ambiance, with their most known piece from this film being Everyone Wants to Be a Cat.
Everybody wants to be a cat.
And there's something about cats and jazz that just makes for a great combination.
Tell me everybody's picking up on that feline beat, 'cause everything else is obsolete.
Although this was the 70s, so this movie's not all sunshine and rainbows. When it comes to the animation, it doesn't feel as perfectly polished as other and previous Disney masterpieces.
Much. Mama, do we have to waddle like they do?
So this was Disney's first film to fully use the Xerox process. And this led to some scratchy, rough, and smudged lines. Basically, xerography is just a process of copying, and this allowed animators to put hand-drawn things directly onto these animation cells. If you ever heard that BoJack scene where he said he feels like a Xerox of a Xerox, he's talking about this. They are also guilty of some classic Disney recycled scenes, but we'll talk about a much bigger culprit later. So it's not like this animation was really so bad, but Disney set a standard for this kind of stuff, so seeing it go a little bit below that standard is cause for concern.
And sit around trying to out-intellectual all the other big fucking intellectuals. You spend years and years with your nose buried in these goddamn tomes.
So on April 14th of 1972, animation changed forever with the release of Fritz the Cat. It was the first ever X-rated animated film. But would it really be X-rated if it dropped today? Probably not. But this rebellious, raw, and fully animated film by Ralph Bakshi, based on the comic strip by Robert Crumb, was something completely new for the time. Ralph Bakshi wasn't happy with the direction animation was going in the 70s.
You have to understand, when I was doing this, animation was crumbling. Understand that animation today is a big deal. In my day, it was falling apart. The entire industry was crumbling, okay?
And to be specific, he didn't like limited animation.
I want to do full animation. It's very important for that reason alone. I'm in New York. I mean, it's the first feature film in New York. I'm using all animators.
Ralph was pretty firm on what he wanted, which brought him on a pretty interesting adventure to get this film made how he wanted. But before we talk about that, let's take a look at the difference between full animation and limited animation so you get an idea of what he's fighting for.
Full animation generally requires 24 frames or 24 drawings of whoever is in the scene per second of film, which results in smooth and beautifully rendered footage. In a 90-minute movie, there are 130,000 frames, which means 130,000 drawings of each character. Limited animation, used for anime and much of what you see on TV, requires half the number of frames or drawings as full animation, or even fewer.
This is a full animation movie, and Ralph Bakshi, who made this movie, was very adamant on that. He wanted it to be a full-on, full animated movie because he hated limited animation. But, of course, that was much too hard for these American studios to actually pull off, so his original plan is he went all the way down to Mexico to get this movie animated to do cell by cell, just like it's kind of supposed to be done, how it's supposed to look better, but the union was very against this. They didn't want to take the jobs out of America, and for good reason. Like, this is a very valid point, so he completely lost his entire studio deal at first. Then, eventually, after much back and forth, he goes to another studio out in LA, because he was based in New York at first, now he's out in LA, and they're like, dude, you can do whatever you want that's gonna get this movie off the ground.
Revolt! Revolt! Revolt, you thick-skulled idiots!
Let me tell you why this movie is X-rated. Although I can get upset at this movie all I want, but this film is incredibly important for animation because Fritz the Cat was basically the first full-length animated feature to be marketed exclusively towards adults. They loved the X rating, and it was a big marketing point for the film. In all honesty, this worked out very well for them as they made over $90 million in the box office. This helped push new boundaries for animation and really started to loosen the notion that animation was just for kids.
Everything in general.
So our first two films were talking about cats. Let's switch it to dogs. So Snoopy Come Home is a cute musical-driven animation that brings the classic Peanut characters to life in their first full-length featured film. So the film revolves around Snoopy as he visits his former owner who is sick in the hospital and Charlie Brown, who's under the impression that Snoopy ran away, and the emotions of both of their situations before Snoopy inevitably comes home. So the best part of this film is definitely the music. The legend Vince G, because I cannot pronounce that name, really elevated the story and reinforced the emotions of the entire animation. I love the innocent jazz vibes, and I think it goes perfectly with the Peanuts. So in reality, this film doesn't have much cultural significance and didn't really move the industry forward in any way. It's just a classic 2D hand-drawn animation, and it is, of course, limited, but I wanted to talk about it and I wanted you to see it because it's just a nice little family film. And who doesn't love Snoopy?
Hold on. Hasn't he done this before?
So you might not have noticed it, but Chris is right. I have used this exact style and concept of transition in a video I made 2 years ago called Who Will Dethrone Netflix?
He's washed, bro. Oh my gosh.
So there's nothing inherently wrong with me doing that. I'm allowed to copyright myself, and hell, it's a good transition. But I only really pull off one of these videos every 6 months. So if you're my buddy Chris, you might just be thinking you're a little disappointed with the quality and wanted to see some different creative stuff going on.
He's recycling transitions.
So this is the basic concept of recycled animation, which is when a studio reuses animation sequences. It is most often seen in television series and isn't really looked down upon too harshly because they're making them weekly. Although, when you're talking about a billion-dollar production company who only made one animated film just about every 2 years at this point in history, I think it's a problem and continues to illustrate how Disney was struggling to start this decade. So let's take a look at some scenes they recycled before we move on. So that's basically what American animation was looking like at the time. A little boring, way over the top, absolutely adorable, and stale. But if we just cross the Atlantic, there was some really interesting stuff going on that was way better. This movie's weird. Really weird. 1973's Fantastic Planet, directed by René Laloux, is one of the most visually striking films you'll ever see. So in this world, the power dynamics are inverted from what we're usually used to. The Drags, who are the blue people, are godlike entities, and they see humans, the Ohms, as nothing more than either a pest or a pet.
Mais il va l'étrangler.
And this made for a terrifying reflection of colonial oppression. This film is really visual philosophy, and it's wrapped in a very engaging, hand-drawn aesthetic. This animation style is called avant-garde. It sort of just revolves around trying new things and unusual ideas. And with this film's world building, unsettling, and borderline dreamlike imagery, it is definitely unusual. So Fantastic Planet was made using cutout stop motion animation, which is where the hand-drawn illustrations are cut and moved frame by frame to create motion. This creates the surreal feeling of the film and makes it look like a living, breathing painting. And also explains why it took 5 years to make. After initially being a little underground, Fantastic Planet is considered one of the greatest animated films of all time, and Rolling Stones has it as the highest ranked animated film from the 1970s. I originally only saw this because it is being taught in a collegiate course. If you watch a single movie from this entire video, please let it be this one. So now let's talk about a film that I think is another huge highlight from the 70s, and that's Hugo the Hippo. Hugo the Hippo was produced by the Pannonia Film Studio of Hungary and released in 1975. And at first, this film was completely obscure. No one really heard of it at the time. It wasn't until 2011 where it was actually released in American theaters and did absolute numbers, by the way. And that's because this film is really cool. It feels like a fever dream and I love it. So I find Hugo the Hippo really interesting for a few reasons, but first let's talk about the plot. It starts off pretty innocent. The leader of Zanzibar, in an effort to fix a rat problem, brings in a group of hippos who do a fantastic job of clearing them out. But eventually they outlive their usefulness and they're abandoned, even hunted.
Every single hippo of Zanzibar was slaughtered on that terrible night. Except one. Hugo.
This leaves a single survivor, Hugo. And from there, the film really shifts into a mix of survival, cruelty, and political allegory in a way that is much heavier from anything you'd expect from a typical kids movie. So now let's take a look at the animation. Pannonia Film Studio, the Hungarian studio that produced this film, are known for their experimental avant-garde approach, and this film is a visual roller coaster. There's a shift between bright, playful sequences and disturbing, surreal imagery, with some really engaging psychedelic imagery thrown in between. The music from this film is also all over the place, and I love how they do it. They dive into funk, jazz, rock, and even some trippy orchestrations that make this a very, very interesting soundtrack. Overall, Hugo the Hippo is in a category of its own. It's strange, emotional, and so visually appealing. Great film. So we just looked at two very experimental pieces, so let's move on to a much more traditional work of art.
And your people will never be destroyed.
1978's Watership Down was based off a book by Richard Adams with the same name. And it's much more traditional because it's hand-drawn and revolves around talking animals that look very realistic.
Cross it? Who's going to cross it? What do you want to cross it for?
And this almost gives it a bit of perception of Disney.
His eyes are too close together. Shifty, too. And look at...
And everyone wanted more Disney at the time, so it kind of just became a kids' movie.
A terrible thing is coming.
What do you mean?
Look. The field.
But it shouldn't have, because it is dark.
Covered with blood.
Blood? Don't be silly.
There are graphic deaths, bloody imagery, survival conflicts, and mentally intense scenes that make it a very questionable watch for children under 13. According to the rating, at least. It actually recently got changed to a PG movie after 44 years. But this is what makes it a really good watch. These rabbits go on a long journey to another area where they are met with very realistic threats and face very realistic consequences. And honestly, I could have done with less of the long-running, gory scenes, but I can't imagine what could have been in that book if they were this intense in the movie. But let's move on to the animation because it is really good. So this is actually the only other fully animated film from this list, along with Fritz the Cat, and that makes for very fluid motion and almost a soothing watch. And the hand-drawn style really makes for some cool detailed scenes and a very lively background. Visually at least, there's nothing really experimental about this film. I just put it here to show that there was very high quality basic productions coming out in the 1970s. Overall, this film is really good. It's the third best in this video, in my opinion. And of course, leave it to the British to get dark. So now we've come to the last full-length featured animated film from this video, and I feel like it would have been a crime to talk about animated films without mentioning at least one work from Japan. So here we have Lupin III, The Secret of Mamo by Monkey Punch from 1978. And this seems to have been a huge film series, to the point where there's still another release scheduled for 2025. And it's because these movies are funny, fun, and adventurous. I'll be completely honest, I watched this movie in Japanese with broken subtitles, so I did not understand a lick of it, and I did not want to pay $3 for it. Lupin's a really cool character because he's kind of an anti-hero. He's not actually a good guy. And one cool thing about this movie, because once again, my first watch, I did not understand a single thing, so I had to go off visually, and visually, their characters are really unorthodox, and I feel like this gives it their own style. But visually, there's nothing about this movie that's gonna like absolutely amaze you, and it is limited animation, of course. But at the end of the day, I'm not in a place to critique this film too much, so I'll just leave it at I'm pretty sure it's a good movie and worth a watch. So before I wrap this video up, I want to go over 3 shows and 3 animated shorts that show things like the industry moving forward and are just big staples from the 1970s. So there's definitely an argument to be made that animation was really shining on television during the 1970s because a lot of these studios weren't making these big movies, but it kinda wasn't as strong as what was going on in the 60s. But there are a few solid ones. And first I want to mention Hanna-Barbera's Scooby-Doo. Everyone knows Scooby-Doo, everyone loves Scooby-Doo. This was a really awesome show that started at the time. But with Scooby-Doo, you see a lot of the limited animation and repeated backgrounds and sort of repetitive storylines that you would expect from an animated series coming out every single week. But overall, Scooby-Doo, which actually debuted in 1969, created a huge franchise and a very loyal fan base. Next up, I want to talk about MGM's Pink Panther. Pink Panther I love because this like jazz cool ambiance, like the Pink Panther's always just been like a suave cool guy, and this was definitely one of the biggest animated series at the time. But it definitely didn't have as strong of a career as Scooby-Doo. At first, they quite literally weren't even showing the Panther enough, and then by the end, it apparently started to get sort of boring, the episodes sort of fall off a little bit, and it's just really tough when your main character is just not doing dialogue at all. But overall, this show just created a really cool aesthetic. And finally, I want to talk about what Warner Brothers was up to at the time, and that was the Bugs Bunny and Roadrunner show.
Roadrunner show.
This show was bad. It was sort of like a real down point of the 70s and is sort of a microcosm for the censorship problems that were going on in the 70s, because in all honesty, the Roadrunner and Bugs Bunny show is just reruns. It was just older other shorts combined together that were made before the 1970s but then released in one package on Sunday, whenever, sometime on Sunday cartoons. But it still wasn't the same, even though they were grabbing some of the same things. Obviously, the adult viewers are going to be like, well, I mean, I already saw this, they don't care anymore. But even for the younger viewers, it wasn't as good because they took out a lot of stuff. The FCC was really cracking down on things like violence, stereotypes, smoking, substance abuse, and just tons of things that make for tons of jokes with Bugs Bunny and the Roadrunner. And just try and think of a Roadrunner scenario without violence. It really just made for a super watered down version of the show and was just a bad look for Warner Brothers. So let's get into these 3 short films that I think were actually pretty important, and 2 of them being very impactful and starting things that are now used very often today. So the first up is Close Mondays, a theatrical short released in 1974 by Will Vinton, who is awesome. So Close Mondays coined the term claymation, which is just a blend of stop motion and animation. And this term is now attached to some iconic productions like Fantastic Mr. Fox, Isle of Dogs, The Corpse Bride, Coraline, Wallace and Gromit, and another film that is not relevant to this video at least. So the short opens to a drunken old man stumbling into an art gallery, and he goes piece by piece, experiencing art in a way that no one has ever done before.
What the?
Overall, this short wasn't just extremely innovative, it was really visually appealing. And for his efforts, Will Vinton won an Academy Award for Best Animated Short Film in 1975. So let's take a look at a film that Closed Mondays actually beat for that same Academy Award in 1975, and that was Peter Fode's 1974 short Hunger. So this one's super weird, but it was one of the very first films to use what we would now consider AI-generated animation. At the time, it was just called computer generation, and he was sort of just making two different images, and the computer would make that middle part where they become each other. So it claims to be about consumerism and greed, but really it's just a guy consistently inhaling food and whatever else he comes across. And I mean, I get the themes they were going for, but the early computer animation matched with the surreal style makes for an uncomfortable and confusing watch. But it led to a lot of advancements in computer animation. And finally, for our last animated short, I want to talk about Russia's biggest contribution to the film industry in the 1970s. And that was Hedgehog in the Fog from 1976. This story follows a cute little hedgehog who seems to be very, very far from home. He encounters danger in a large land with many unknowns that scare him a lot. Which sounds like Russia. This one is interesting because it was incredibly detailed. They used the same paper cutout animation from other films we talked about, and with that they were able to build these sets to look very natural and realistic. And the coolest part was the fog itself. They made it using glass and paper, which created an atmosphere that left a lot up to interpretation. Overall, this short had incredible visual quality. So that is a lot of information we just digested. That was 8 films, 3 series, and 3 animated shorts that really made up the bulk of what was going on in the 1970s. And from this, the main thing I'm getting is that the 1970s were an important transitional decade for American animation. The golden age of American animation to the dark age. Being as it was sandwiched between 2 very impressive decades, it is seen as subpar, inferior, and cheap.
When I was doing this, animation was crumbling. Understand that animation today is a big deal. In my day, it was falling apart.
And while those claims aren't completely unfair, I believe they underestimate an era of experimental animation that pushed the industry forward during a time of imperfect conditions. There were just a lot of economic struggles at the time. American animation was dealing with things like a recession, which really hampered their budgets and made films take longer with lower quality. It doesn't feel as perfectly polished as other and previous Disney masterpieces. And this led to the limited animation that was such a hallmark of this decade and gives everyone a terrible taste. But it was just because of the recession, they had to resort to much more cost-effective forms of animation. And that included things like the zero graph, repeating animations and backgrounds, and smaller staffs. But to me, a lot of these films are really awesome and would hold their own against some of the highlights of other decades. Alright, well that's just going to be about it, so let's just run through a couple fun facts I found while making this video that I thought were pretty interesting, so I thought I would throw them in at the end. For one, Disney wrote a letter to Ralph Bakshi when he was making this movie before it released, Fritz the Cat, just basically being like, you are disrespecting animation, like how could you do this to Disney, like mad. They were pissed, so I mean, that was just dumb, like I don't know how they think they own animation, but whatever. Pixar started at the end of the 1970s, 1979. It wasn't called Pixar originally, but in 1979, Pixar started. Also, during this 70s period, Warner Brothers shut down their entire animated film division. So just more like, wow, this was a really rough time. But one thing I really didn't talk about was the fact that Disney really bounced back in the second half of this decade. Like they ended up doing really good with Winnie the Pooh and I want to say The Rescuers. Yeah, it was The Rescuers. Winnie the Pooh actually ended up being the most profitable animated film from the 1970s, so it's kind of messed up to not even talk about it, if I'm being honest. But yeah, no, that was an interesting thing. So I just wanted you to know, Disney wasn't completely just down in the dust after this. They really bounced back nicely in The Rescuers. That was a really good movie. yeah, that's just about all the like interesting fun facts that I found that I couldn't really fit into this video. But thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you also believe that the 1970s saved animation, because without all this, animation wouldn't look the same at all. This was a very necessary period of bad movies and, you know, like trying new stuff. Yeah, so also hope you guys appreciated that I sectioned out this entire video in the description, my first time doing that, and hopefully it helps stuff. I don't know. What else? Make sure to follow me on Instagram, hippo.clips. Make sure to follow me on Letterboxd. That's what it is, Letterboxd. I think it's hippo_clips. I'll put a description, or I'll put a link in the description, and you'll be able to see on there. I have this entire video literally listed into a Letterboxd list, just in case you'd rather read than listen to me talk. And yeah, thank you to everyone that helped me make this video. Ignore the mess. I live in my parents' basement, but thank you, Jake, for helping me do some parts of this, and thank you, Justin, for watching a lot of these movies with me. And yeah, alright, that's it. I'm done taking your time. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe. Maybe I'll even make more videos like this. Maybe if we really want, I could do this, but about the 80s. You know, the original idea I had. But yeah, that's it. Thanks for watching. Bye.
Nightmare. 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 Nightmare.